you for joining us for the Dialogue Out Loud podcast. My name is Teresa Wellborn. Today we are in conversation with poets in our spring 2024 issue, Robbie Taggart and M. Rather Jr. Welcome, both of you. Happy to have you here today.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Thank you. So I'd like to just start by way of introduction, doing a brief bio on both of our authors, starting with Robbie Taggart. Before coming to BYU, Robbie taught in seminaries and institutes for 17 years. He received his Ph.D. in theological leadership from the University of the Cumberlands. He is associate professor of ancient scripture at BYU with a Ph.D. in theological leadership. He regularly writes poems inspired by his reading of sacred texts, and you can find him and some of his poems at www.instagram.com. Come follow me poetry. All right. And then we'd also like to introduce Michael Rather Jr. He is the Dean of Instruction at SOWELA Technical Community College, located in Louisiana. He has a Ph.D. in English and Creative Writing from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, among other degrees. He's taught English in high school, directed plays, and even ran the Oskaloosa Poetry Slam. Woohoo! He is currently a student of European and martial arts and a prolific writer with work appearing in numerous journals. Welcome to both of you this evening. All right. So I'd like to start by, I have a few questions for both of you. So I'd like to start by asking Robbie, who are your literary influences? This one's for Robbie.
Okay. Marilynne Robinson comes to mind. She's a novelist, but I, as an undergrad, came across her novel, Gilead. I was a young dad. Maybe I was in my master's program. Susan Elizabeth Howe introduced me to her. So I think I was in my master's program, but I remember just reading Gilead with this sense of kind of this luminous holiness to the everyday. And I was bathing my kids, and I had this sense that I was like washing them, anointing them with shampoo, about to clothe them in the robes of their little fuzzy towels. And I just felt like this is something I want to perceive and live in, kind of for the rest of my life. And I think that makes its way into my poetry a lot. She's not a poet, but she writes in a very lyrical way. Cool. Some of the poets, I love James Goldberg, one of our Latter-day Saint poets. I love his willingness to engage with religious ideas, to tell the truth, but tell it slant, to look at things with an angle of curiosity and humility and kind of wonder. I love a lot of Catholic writers, and so and I think it's because of their sense of the sacramental nature of existence. Probably there's a guy named Brian Doyle who writes a lot of essays. He's written some novels and some kind of like prose poems where his take on poetry is you sort of like tell a very short story, in this poetic way. But then I would say, like, the Bible, the scriptures, the ways that these ancients tried to articulate something of their relationship with God in language that was often beautiful and pointed to something beyond themselves. And then the Jewish midrashes. I did my master's degree looking actually at Marilynne Robinson's novel Gilead as kind of like this midrashic retelling of the Abraham narrative. What I love about the midrashes is their willingness to sort of bring this playfulness to their engagement with scriptures, to kind of enter the gaps of the text, to ask questions, and to sense that there's more going on there than what appears on the surface of any text. And I think that's part of what makes it a text sacred, is its inexhaustibility, the ways that we keep coming back to it over and over and over again, and it bears sort of pushing on and asking questions of. And so you'll see a lot of what I do in my poetry has to do with engaging another text as if it's holy, but also as if the enterprise of engaging it is holy, is a continuation maybe of the text.
So like a continued conversation then with that text.
Yeah. A dialogue, you might say.
Yes. Okay. Very cool. I appreciate how you said you noted playfulness and humor. And the older I get, the more I am so grateful for humility and also that playfulness that comes in, that and joy that's part of reading in that experience. So I think it eliminates moments in life that they're so real and true, and then just bring everything home for me. So Wonderful. Thank you. We're going to jump over now to Michael. Michael, we have a question for you now. Tell us about your journey to becoming a poet. When did you start writing, and what kind of keeps your pen going?
Well, I would say as soon as I could write, I started writing poetry. As far back as I can remember, I've made attempts at writing poetry, attempts at writing fiction as well, and plays. I've dabbled a bit in other genres. But I have books that I put together in second grade of poems. Our teacher would have us do that. And so it started very early. It's been a long, meandering journey, with my interest in theater and music. Poetry was always in the background of that. But I really came to it wholeheartedly when I was living in Iowa City, Iowa. And I really wanted to get into that University of Iowa Writers Workshop because, it's so famous. And
notable.
Yeah, that didn't really work out for me. But I discovered performance poetry, slam poetry at the time, which, I was in my early 20s. So it was really appealing and got involved in that scene, pretty much lived in that scene. And then I started trying to get my work published. And once I did, I started exploring MFA programs and actually got accepted to the MFA program at McNeese State University here in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And that's where I really feel like I came into my own as a poet. A great program. And it's been a part of my life ever since, more so thinking of myself as a professional poet. So yeah.
Do you still do poetry slams?
No, I left that behind in my early 30s. So.
Okay. I was curious. I am known to attend those randomly and sometimes just kind of, into script in the back row. But once in a while I'll get up to random ones in different cities. And I think they're really fun. I am an older person, so the youth and vitality that I do see now in poetry slams is really welcome. It's cool. So maybe give it a try this year. I don't know.
I left it behind in part because it was so didactic.
Okay.
I feel like at that age, being younger, you want to be didactic. You want to be argumentative.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
As I progressed in my studies of poetry and I became enamored with more subtlety, not really coming out right away and saying, this is what I believe or this is what I stand for, making an argument necessarily.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So there's definitely a place for slam poetry, isn't there?
Oh, yeah.
But I feel like it's a part of my experience and journey as well as a writer. So I think that's valuable, and it's helped you be who you are, which is cool. Great. Okay. So we're going to go back to Robbie. Robbie, we have a question for you. Let's see. What do you find as you revisit themes in your poetry? And do you happen to have any of your poems available to read with us now?
Yeah, I have the ones that are in the issue. I'm link here. Yeah.
Do you mind reading to us your poem "Seer"?
Yeah, I would love to.
Thank you.
Seer, inspired by Moses 6. Even as a young child, he saw in ways others did not. When his mother sang him the old stories, he would open his inner eyes and see the lanky cerulean legs of clouds as they walked across the open sky. In the footprints of cats on the earth, he saw the settling distillations of tree song. He saw under the surface of things the other world that was always breaking through into this one. The glistening ways the colors of God shone through in the voices of frogs, and in the redolent smell of the mosses yearning. He knew that the earth was God's body. He perceived an intricate connectedness between the cedar leaves' whisper swish and the glimmer of the raven's wing. He saw the sound of the mountains exhale, nestled under the blankets of their winter snows, saw the flavors of autumn winds tickling delight in angels' tongues. But he could not see God in the people among whom he walked in the marketplace, with their waxy hearts weighed down with greed and lust, and their dull yellow ears listening only for the tinny sound of praise. These beings who could not perceive beyond the length of their own ugly noses. Their children who mocked his inability to articulate why in the games he played there was no triumph at another's loss, but only a lilt of melody when a bee's joy erupted into ecstatic light. these children whose laughter taunted him like giants who jeered their rancor for the small. All the people hate me, he told God that day in the meadow, with the lilies of the field catching fire all around them. And not until he anointed his eyes with dirt did he learn to see through the mire the holiness that abides incarnate in every breathing soul. And only then did he speak of the things he saw beyond.
That's just stunning. That's a really remarkable poem. The second stanza really struck me. Surprising turns of phrase. Well, the first stanza as well, in the lanky cerulean legs of clouds as they walked across the open sky. The second stanza, the glistening ways, the colors of God shone through the voices of frogs. I mean, you're taking a frog, right, which is slimy and like, silly looking, and you're intertwining it with God, and it's the low and the high, which I revisit often in my podcast here with Dialogue, but also in my own journey as a poet, kind of that connectedness, right, with nature and all things kind of the earth and God. And tell us more.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like, honestly, maybe it's the essence of poetry to perceive the sacredness in the common, right? To see that there's a reality that transcends our capacity to perceive. And I think that's probably why in the things you talk about, there's a lot of kind of synesthesia, right? Where you're talking about the colors of voices, or the smell of yearning, or things like that. And I think it's just a language that tries to reach beyond maybe what you can see or what you can say. And I like the notion of a seer. This is a poem about Enoch, who, is described as a seer in the land. And what does a seer see? Well, a seer sees into the heart of reality, sees maybe beyond what other people can see. But the turn of the poem is this sense that if you can perceive God everywhere but in your neighbor, everywhere but in the people who are not like you, everywhere but in maybe the place you need to see it the most, then you need anointed eyes, and maybe mud anointed eyes. I love that God anoints Enoch's eyes with mud. Such an unexpected gesture. But if God is going to anoint us, maybe it's going to be with the everyday, the common, the earthy, the muddy. And once that has been smeared on our eyes by God, we begin to see, we see glistening oil everywhere. We see God everywhere.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you, Robbie. That's outstanding poem. Thank you. We're going to jump over back to Michael. Okay, so let's talk about Joseph Smith. Your poems, Michael, and this issue center around him. Have you found a dearth of poetry about Joseph Smith? How did you put yourself also into like the headspace of Joseph Smith? Tell us about that.
So to answer your first question, I'm not familiar with a lot of actual Mormon poetry, and poetry focused on Joseph Smith are trying to speak through that voice. And I'm surprised to learn how much there actually is in our earlier conversation. I apologize, my dog's in here. So really, the poem started out mainly about him. Well, it's another long story because I've been working on this for about 15 years, and I was inspired by John Wood's poetry. He had some poems in one of his collection that were written through the voice of a prophet that he invented, an invented character. Mm-hmm. And my family has history in Mormonism. And I thought, well, why not just try to speak in the voice of a prophet that existed, right? And take him at his word and try to inhabit that. So I started working through that voice and imagining what it would be like. I think he was, if I remember correctly, he was 14 years old when he started that journey toward finding the church, beginning the church, when he first was visited, and just thinking about the impact of, say, being a 14-year-old or younger and having God come to you, Christ come to you and say, you're going to create this or bring back the proper church, and just really thinking about what kind of psychological impact that would be in trying to have and trying to speak through that voice. What helped me a lot is a focus on form.
Okay.
I think that heightens the language and the poems themselves. They originally were very strict sonnets that I then sort of dismantled from the more strict sonnet form. And I think that opened up, focusing on the language, focusing on form, opened up opportunities for unique language and turns of phrase, basically, that would lend itself to things like prophecy or the spiritual realm.
So cool. Do you have a moment to read a memory of prayer? We're going to have somebody. And before you start, well, maybe you read it first, and then I'll talk after.
My shins are dirt covered, my hands tighten round piles of leaves. These trees rise round, cloth and woolen bark and silver lichen. Stained glass sky, branches flux and foil, and kaleidoscopic light strikes the ground, whose green intersects the red soil. This cathedral of helices, of dust motes that are caught in beams of eye-width light, is where I wait to be lifted beyond this ground, lifted bodily through the hushed leaves. It is for this my soul I do dight with hours here, pine needle on, knees press the dirt. Here a quiet voice speaks between the croaks and mutters of birds' beaks.
That's ingenious. I love what you've done here. I love the bird's beaks. I love the pine needle on. You have a wordplay there, and also it feels very dense to me, like I'm in a forest. It's like, yeah, your writing is very striking. I also, can we talk about just for a minute your poem, The First Wound and My Dream? Both of those were surprisingly gritty and dark, but I like the gritty and dark. And I was thinking of having you read one of those as well, but we're going to let our readers check out our online journal and read those. But wow, yeah, you don't shy away from that, and I appreciate that. Nuances of blackness and of caliper fingers forced open, and you have some really it's not jarring, but it's very intriguing. Yeah, really intriguing wordplay and a collection of imagery there. So thank you so much for what you've contributed to this issue. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so the last question I have is for both of you together, and I will ask the question. We'll go to Robbie first to answer, and then we'll go back to Michael. So what book are you currently reading? Robbie?
Oh man, you got to say books because I never.
I have my pen ready.
Okay, let's see. I am reading a book by Bell Hooks called The Will to Change. So she's a feminist writer, and it's ultimately about reclaiming a non-patriarchal masculinity. It's a book for men. And ultimately she affirms the value of mutuality, of compassion. And she doesn't say it, but Jesus is kind of the epitome of the manhood she's kind of describing. I'm reading The Prophets by Abraham Joshua Heschel. I'm in the middle of The Enormous Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver.
Uh-huh.
So I'm at a depressing lull in it, it's just so sad.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm making my way through W.S. Merwin's Migrations, which is his collected poetry.
Merwin's awesome. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You pretty much have a nightstand with a stack.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. We'll jump back over to Michael. Are you reading anything you'd like to share with us?
Well, going back through Epictetus's discourses. So I'm a huge fan of philosophy, particularly Stoic philosophy. I find it fascinating. I always pick up, I'm a big fan of science fiction, fantasy. So of course the standards, I always have a book on Tolkien or Tolkien's writing or the history of Middle Earth lying around. And I'll pick that up and look at it on occasion.
Are you a Sanderson fan? Are you a Sanderson fan?
I haven't read much Sanderson.
My son's read him. I haven't read him, but he's a big fantasy guy. He's an LDS player. Okay. Well, before we end, I'd like to, we're about at time. I have a quote I'd like to share. It's by Ursula Le Guin, and it's from her Literary Arts and Lectures in 2000. She said, beneath memory and experience, beneath imagination and invention, beneath words, there are rhythms to which memory and imagination and words all move. The writer's job is to go down deep enough to feel that rhythm and let it move memory and imagination to find the words. I'd like to thank both of you, Robbie and Michael, for joining us tonight. I feel as if your words have moved us, and hopefully, I believe they've moved yourselves as well, to different realms of experience and a deeper nature and understanding of what is holy and what it means to be human. Thank you again for joining us for Dialogue Out Loud podcast, featuring our lovely poets, Robbie Taggart and Michael Rather Jr. Please check out our spring 2024 issue. It does include an awesome roundtable with multiple voices, including the question is posed, should LDS Church apologize for its history of racism? You want to check out the material, please visit us online at www.dialoguejournal.com. We're also found on various and sundry social media, including YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter. We look forward to seeing you next time here on Dialogue Poetry Out Loud. Thank you.
Beyond the Block, part of the Dialogue Podcast Network, is a weekly Come Follow Me podcast that centers the marginalized in Mormonism. Join Brother Jones and Brother Knox, a Black lifelong member and a queer convert theologian respectively, as they read the scriptures through the lenses of their identities and others in an effort to bring the culture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints closer and more in line with its theology, which centers Christ's justice and compassion. New episodes every Monday.
Dialogue Podcast Network.